this.
Me
Me
too.
too.
Me too.
Me too.
Me too. Me too.
Me too.
Me too.
If all the women who have been sexually harassed or assaulted wrote Me Too as a status, we might give people a sense of the magnitude of the problem.
Were you on
Facebook yesterday or this morning and noticed this was a status posted by a large chunk of women on your friends list?
I woke up
this morning to see that so many women posted this as their status the day before. Now, I didn't check social media yesterday and I had missed it,
but I
but I explained that and posted it to my Facebook as well.
I think
I think it's important to bring any awareness to the fact that it's happened to you too.
So I
copied and pasted it, and if you've been sexually harassed or assaulted, I really hope that you did too.
My only
problem with it is that it does clearly say women rather than person or people, because I do know that it's happened to men too.
Maybe not
as much, but it does happen.
I think
also
that
most of the stories I've heard of it happening
to a
to a man,
majority of
majority of the time it's another man doing it,
but
it
still
happens.
I'm
probably not as educated as I should be to talk about this subject, but that is, once again, just my opinion.
This
This awareness is being fueled by the Harvey Weinstein scandal, and within Hollywood, a lot of women and men have also come forward about messed up things that have happened to them.
I think
that maybe it could happen more often in Hollywood to men, but my mind has been filled with thoughts of bullying and inappropriate things
that happens
to everyone, boys and girls,
men and women,
etc.,
etc. How did it make
you feel?
To see
the amount of people that this has affected.
To make you
To make you mad, sad?
I mean, like
it
it
should have.
My first
My first memory of sexual harassment
or assault,
I guess it would have been called,
was when I was
14 years old.
Now,
I have blocked out the majority of my life before the age of 14.
But this is
the first memory I do have of it,
and I have
many more after it,
being in the
being
industry
in the industry that I've worked in.
Many more
minor things.
But this was
probably
the first
really bad thing that happened.
I was at a
party at my friend's house.
There were a few
of us in a bedroom upstairs,
and
I really can't remember what happened, but everyone ran downstairs to see something.
It's probably
someone doing
something
stupid.
I mean,
as middle school age teens do.
And this guy,
his
name was
Matt.
He grabbed my
hand and said, "Hold on, I want to show you something."
I didn't think
anything of it in that moment, but before I knew it, he had me on my friend's bed and was trying to pull my jeans off of my body.
I was lucky.
One of the guys ran back upstairs. He had forgotten his lighter or something.
And
he burst in the door and was like, "Oh shit, sorry!"
And Matt
jumped off of me.
I jumped up, pulled my pants back up, and ran out of the bedroom.
I went home right away.
No one ever
talked about this incident.
I didn't
talk about it. They didn't talk about it.
And I didn't
go to another party with that group of people for a very, very long time.
I was a
virgin when this happened,
and I
stayed a virgin for a few years after that, barely touching or allowing anyone to touch me.
I can
definitely say that it ruined a few things for me
and
inside
inside
of me. And it also stopped me from exploring sexually at that age, as most of my friends were doing, if not all of my friends.
I am happy
that I waited,
but it makes
me sad to think about the reason that I waited.
If you're wondering
what happened to Matt,
the
guy who tried to rape me,
he's dead.
I knew that he had died,
but I never
really cared to look into how.
Thinking about
all this today, I did a little investigating,
and
I also reached out to an old friend of mine because I knew that he would know.
He told me
what happens.
I looked
up the news stories, and it's true.
He got burned
to death in his car.
It is believed
it was targeted in a gang-related incident.
It's a pretty messed
up way to die.
But I couldn't
help
but think
that it also said a lot for the person that he was.
As
messed up as that also feels to say.
But something
else that is messed up
is the fact
that I dismissed his actions for so many years,
and so did
others.
He successfully raped other girls after this happened between us.
And again, I had heard things, but never stepped forward or told the story of him.
Because I didn't
feel like it was really that important.
And that is how
so many people feel about their stories.
That they
aren't important.
If you've been
sexually harassed or assaulted,
you should tell
your story.
It's about time
that something more was done about this.
That is one of many stories that have been told within the last week. Since October 15th, when Alyssa Milano tweeted this, "Me Too, suggested by a friend, if all the women who have been sexually assaulted posted Me Too as a status, we might give people a sense of the magnitude of the problem. If you've been sexually harassed or or assaulted, write Me Too as a reply to this tweet. Since then, there's been 68,000 replies to Milano's tweet, specifically on Twitter. By last Monday, Twitter has confirmed Me Too has been tweeted more than 500,000 times. More than 6 million Facebook users are talking about Me Too, and Instagram has more than 300,000 posts associated with the hashtag, not a hat tag. It's been opening the door for deeper conversations, thoughtful responses, and maybe some debate. But we do need more. Much more. But what specifically? That is what we are here to find out. Welcome to Agree or Disagree, the podcast. This is Kevin Olenek. Today is the first of a 4-part series on this topic. And we are talking today really with I have a female panel, 2 people I deeply respect, and the girl that you heard on the video. And part 2, we will be talking about the online dating component with Casey Logan. But I would like to introduce you first to the 2 people I deeply respect and personally admire. I could have picked thousands of people, really. We could have filled this studio with... We probably could have filled the school with so many people that have this. Easily. That voice you heard, it is her first time ever on a podcast, so hopefully you're patient with her. That's Jen Courtney. You've heard her online before. She's posted stuff. She's actually posted a lot of stuff on this. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Good. The second is, and first she was surprised that she's actually sitting in a studio with me on a podcast rather than an actual restaurant with noise in the background. Yes. That's Callie Reedwin. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm well. How are
Good.
you?
Good. And the person that you posted what you just heard is Alexis Hart. Hi. She comes from an unconventional background, taking care of herself from a very young age. Expressing herself through writing started as a hobby that is turning into a career. An advocate for mental health awareness, a Miley Cyrus fanatic, a Harry Potter enthusiast, lover of all doggos, catos, pigos, goats, seals, etc., etc., etc. Her happy place is anywhere 30 meters deep in the Pacific Ocean. Hello.
Correct. Hi.
You told me to give you that. So
that's my school bio that we are using. So yeah, that's me pretty much in a nutshell, kind of.
Yeah. I just also want to be cognizant of a couple of things. We're not doing this on Facebook Live. We're not doing this with cameras and stuff because I really feel that this is going to be an emotional topic. So if you need to pause or you need to reflect or you need to stop, I understand. This is not an easy topic. And to be quite frank, I don't think any other podcast has approached this the way that we are about to. So I understand if you need to take a break. Yeah. And I say that to both my guests, and I say that to you as an audience. And I do have an agenda when we were talking a little bit more, but I think the best way to start is just simply let you guys react to what you heard. And I leave the floor.
React to what I wrote, or like them reacting?
Just
To
you
me,
guys,
to
just go.
Me too.
Yeah.
Or in general.
Maybe I'll start with my first reactions to the Me Too campaign. And first, I think it was one of the few truly useful things that people were participating in online. I think there's a lot of keyboard warriors, so to speak. But I think that sharing this particular one was really important, and so that was the first piece. And the second piece was sort of the bubbling rage, really, that it brought forward. And in a couple of conversations between Jen and Kevin, they can tell you the same thing. And the reason I felt rage was because, of course, Me Too. Of course. Every woman knows this. Every woman. And it's just so frustrating to be like, hey, this exists in the world, when it's always been a problem. And it's frustrating that it even needs to be a topic, I guess. So the the conversations that are happening are so important, and I'm glad that someone captured this conversation in a hashtag, and that a hashtag is being used for a hashtag's purpose, I suppose, as a former marketer myself. But it's both liberating and frustrating. It's frustrating that we need to state the obvious over and over again, and to me really illustrated how crappy of a job the world has done at listening, period. Listening to women, listening to victims in general, and all of the things that came after that were sort of a compounding on that. Like, of course this is happening. So, yeah. I mean, that's not as eloquent as I had hoped, I suppose. But I think it's just like, oh, okay, well, humans have DNA. Well, of course humans have DNA, you know. That and the fact that it is so obvious and that it is so pervasive is the part that's so enraging. Like, if you're not enraged by this, then you are blissfully unaware of the problem.
And be willfully ignorant.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and sometimes not willfully. Sometimes it's just the privilege of not having had that experience. And you might hear the word male privilege further in this conversation, but I want to point out for sure that I hope when men listen to this, they don't have a negative association with the term male privilege. It's a statement of fact. You go through this world with a different set of resources and a different approach to things because you were born into it, and it's not your fault that the world is positioned towards you and your comfort. But you do have to understand that it is not positioned for women, and you have to be aware of that context. So even if you are the nice guy and you've done all the right things and you're a decent human being and all the rest, simply acknowledging and understanding the context with which we are discussing here is, and that you live in an everyday sense, then I think we'd be a lot better off if people just accepted, well, I was born, this height, I was born male, I was born in this part of the world, you don't have any control over that, but yet you benefit from it. And what I've learned in my own exploration of systemic oppression is that privilege is the first step to acknowledging, holy crap, I'm operating with not enough information here. And that's the cue to listen to the people who do live with it. So that's my rant.
That's good. Definitely. I felt very frustrated, of course, when I first saw it too, because it is a daily thing that happens all over the world. Some places more than others. Like, we probably have it quite well here in Canada. But yeah, just the frustration, definitely, because it just happens every day to so many women that I know. I have so many stories.
Where do you even begin? That's the part. Yeah, exactly. It's like, have you ever been sexually harassed? I'm like, what, today?
Yeah, exactly.
What number would you like?
A couple hours ago? Or
yeah,
what time is it?
Yeah, and my first reactions are similar too. I mean, I think when we look at the fact that it's sexual assault and sexual misconduct of any kind at any level has been so normalized in society that so many men didn't translate the obviously available statistics to actual real live women. It's a bit of social naff that just didn't occur, and it is indicative of a deeply ingrained attitude towards not acknowledging how women are disenfranchised or how people are sexually violated. The other part of it that's super frustrating for me is hearing people, men and women, say, well, it's always been that way. I'm just not going to participate in it. And that's clearly not enough. Women should be able to expect basic decency from men, and right now we can't. It should not be considered just a sort of a passive problem that women are continuously sexually harassed, sexually maligned, sexually assaulted. It's not enough to say, I don't rape. Well, okay, great. You don't rape. Fantastic. But what are you actually doing to actively look at and participate in solving the problem in society? Just being a nice guy and not raping isn't enough to give you a chocolate medal at any time. There is more that you can do, and to say, well, I'm just not going to participate isn't even close to enough. There are so many things that men and women can do to re-educate both young men and young women. And sexual assault is spoken of as a passive thing. It's something that happens to women, when it actually needs to be flipped around to a more active voice where men are raping women. Women don't get raped like it's a Christmas present. It's an active choice by the predator to physically violate another human being. And we need to be really clear about the fact that that's what sexual predation is. It's not a passive process, it's an active choice. And at the same time, everybody has the option of taking an active part in solving the problem.
So
boys will be boys thing really needs to stop. Like, I get it. Like, when you're talking, like, of course guys are going to talk about how hot a girl is. Like, girls talk about that too. Like, we're like, oh my god, Channing Tatum, whatever. But that needs to stop, because when some guy is saying to his bros, like, oh, I got with this girl because she was so drunk and whatever, and they're like, yeah, like, that is such a huge problem right there. Like, right there, a guy should be like, that's not cool. Like, that's so simple thing to say. So simple.
And I
say
think
that's not cool.
to illustrate that a little further too, it's not a fair comparison to say guys say this and girls say this, because when someone who is in, like, okay, let's say a man says, hey girl, you're really hot, and I'm just complimenting you, and you should appreciate that. What you have to understand is the context with which she's receiving that so-called compliment. And in her personal experience, that has led to violence and negative experiences, most likely. So it's not the same as saying, oh, well, I wish, I have plenty of male friends that will say, I really wish that that people would compliment me, or that wouldn't bother me if someone said, hey, you look sexy in that, or whatever. But it's not apples and apples here, because a woman complimenting a man is a compliment. A man complimenting a woman has to think, holy crap, am I in a safe place? Is this person going to stalk me? I've personally had 2 to 3 stalkers, actual stalkers, in my life.
I've had two.
Leaving stuff on my car at my doorstep. Like, I didn't even know
Finding
how they
different
found
ways
out that
home.
I knew where I lived.
Yeah.
Like, how did you figure that out? Just following me home from work, I'm assuming. But yeah. Definitely.
So as a man, you have to understand that you might not be a bad guy, but there have been so many experiences that particular woman has had before you. And that's what you're really up against here.
And to build on that, I mean, sure, you might give a woman a compliment, but giving a woman a compliment doesn't actually entitle you to anything at all, except a thank you. So if I get catcalled, or if some guy compliments me and I say thanks very much, that doesn't mean that he can give me his phone number or ask me for mine. Like, move on,
follow you around,
or follow me around, or touch me in any way. Thanks for the compliment. Have a nice day. That should be enough. That's just basic manners. No thanks should never be responded to with, oh my god, you're such a bitch. No thanks means no thanks. Just because I'm not going to date you doesn't give you the right to abuse me. So that context is really important too. A compliment doesn't actually entitle you to anything at all. And if you're doing it with the intent of getting something in return, then it's not actually a compliment, it's a manipulation tool.
And I'll add to that too, to the same line of thought that I was just talking about, is understanding that a woman's response to your advances is directly linked to her experiences and the experiences that all women have had. So if it bothers you that it's really hard to open up a conversation innocently in a bar or online dating or dating regular way or whatever, the reason that rejection is hard, the reason that a woman will generally not respond favorably to you, and the reason that dating has become so difficult is because a woman is assessing whether or not you are a direct threat to her. And the reason for that is other men. Mm-hmm. So really this is I feel like if you're a man and you're listening to this and you're understanding, well, but I'm a nice guy and I just want to talk to women, and how come I can't just go up to someone and buy her a drink and politely give her my number or whatever, and she can take it or not take it. And that would really change if male behavior changed. If you would, stop harassing and assaulting us, we would be more receptive to the nice people.
And stop insisting that the exchange happens solely on your own terms. I mean, if you want to go up and talk to a woman, that's great, but don't think that just because you have approached her, that your expectation of how the conversation is going to go is how it's actually going to happen. Mm-hmm. It's actually a two-way exchange.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it might not be a good time or place. Right? And yeah, I think that this whole issue, also going back to the Me Too, about the men speaking up about Me Too, I think it's really important for survivors to talk about what has happened to them and to make this a less daunting topic, a less taboo topic, because it does happen to everybody. But I would say that my personal opinion is that the conversations should start with women, and I think that men really need to listen, although I'm sure so many men have had terrible experiences. Understanding and listening to what's been going on with women, the more that we can become equal, the more it becomes easier for men to talk about things too. The more normal it is for men to express emotions and to come forward about being abused and so forth. So really, the solution for everyone here is to fix this gendered problem first, because it spills into the other issues of toxic masculinity and feeling like as a man you can't, if something like that has happened to you, that you feel like you can't say something because it makes you less of a man, or all of those trapping ideas are coming from the same place. So we need to fight this together.
Were you going to say something?
No.
Okay, so... Okay, go ahead.
And Callie makes a really, really good point there, but there's a really, really huge difference between saying, well, it happens to everybody, as a way to shut down dialogue and shut down the women's voices, and say, well, it happens to everybody, so shut up about it, we're not going to talk. And those men who are saying, yeah, it's happened to me too, as a way of sharing experiences and perhaps learning and, gaining some equality. But for women, especially in online conversation, it's really, really tricky to determine which men are actually sincerely saying, yes, it happens to men too, or which men are using that to, again, shut down dialogue, or who are hiding behind sort of a veneer of faux feminism, and aren't being sincere about their intent. So for women, it's really quite shark-infested waters to figure out who you can actually connect with, whether that's on social media or even in real life. So it's just as much of running a gamut as going through a bar or being on an online dating site. We have to be careful.
And the fact that we have to be careful is the problem.
Yes.
The very idea of, I don't know any woman that will walk in a dark area alone, unarmed, and not think about it.
Yeah,
like, personally,
you're shaking and looking around you at all times, and yeah, you're terrified.
I might not be terrified because I'm a pretty ferocious creature, but
it's true.
But at the same time, I also know that if a predator wants to get me, there's not much I can do to stop that.
And I think that's
I'm small, I'm female, and most of the time I don't walk down dark alleys anyway. Nobody should, But at the same time, you have to look out. You have to see who's under the lamppost. That guy that's walking towards you on the sidewalk, is he a predator? Is he going to do something douchey? Or is he going to be polite and say good evening, or possibly cross the street and walk on the other side of the street? Because some men realize that makes women feel safer.
Yeah.
But it's impossible to tell.
I think that's part of it, too, is you have to kind of start with the women, because it does happen to us more. And I think the main reason it does is, like what you're saying, is because typically guys are a lot stronger than us. Like what happened to me, I couldn't fight him off. I was trying to, but he was stronger. I was lucky. But I think that's why you should start with women, but also come together and connect to make it better.
I think it's just super messed up that we can say, oh, I've been sexually harassed or I've been assaulted, but I was lucky. It wasn't that bad.
Oh yeah, no, I know.
That's the part
that
kills me.
You feel embarrassed to tell your story because you don't think it's important. Because, it didn't actually happen or whatever. Yeah.
That and does it count to be catcalled? Does it count that my uncle touched me? Does it, that doesn't really count as rape, right?
Yeah.
The fact that it's so minimized is is just mind-boggling to me.
Terrible.
Like,
But that's partially because we have, and I'm saying we as men have debated that and invalidated that in a lot of ways. Because, well, that's not that bad, really. I mean, I had someone, we talked about, because someone compared this Harvey Weinstein, because someone messaged me and said, why are you not talking about Harvey Weinstein? And I said, just because I haven't had a chance to, in a nutshell. And she was like, well, what Donald Trump did wasn't as bad as what Harvey Weinstein did. I mean, Trump said stuff, but he didn't do stuff. And that, I'm like, that's not the same. That's the problem, though. She's not the only one that thinks that, right? We all were like, well, that's not as bad. We have this level of as bad. Well,
and it's not comparative. Assault is assault.
Yeah.
Assault is
Yeah.
assault.
So
yeah, if I stabbed you in the throat and I stabbed you in the rib, did I stab you? Yes.
Or were you walking with a knife in your pocket and approaching me?
Yeah.
You know, that's the thing is you might not have been stabbed, you might not have whatever, but every time, to use a knife analogy, every time you see that weapon, it's going to be like, well, what's going to happen next, right? And unfortunately, simply appearing male means you're a walking weapon to women. Mm-hmm. Women have to consider you that way, because if we don't, it's self-protective. You know, we have to.
Because if a man attacks us, we are somehow responsible. Well, why didn't you see it coming? Why didn't you fight harder? Why were you this? Why we have to justify our existence in that situation and prove our virtue or our effort or etc.
As if it has anything to do.
As if it has anything to do with the fact that we've been attacked, and it simply doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Why were you wearing a low-cut shirt? That's my thing.
Why were you assaulting someone?
Yeah, I posted this on Facebook. You know, sexual assault is the only crime on the books where the temptation to do it can be used as a legitimate legal defense for having committed the crime. It's ridiculous. Well, I couldn't help myself. Why not?
Yeah.
And there are, you know, in courts across America and in other parts of the world, that is actually a legitimate legal defense. And it's bullshit.
Yeah. And, I mean, not to, this could be a big old rabbit hole, but I like to point out to my male friends that women have only been considered human for like 100 years.
Yeah.
Human. Not even, you know, equal rights. I mean, not the same as a dog or lower.
Or the couch.
It's as literally a piece of property for about 100 years. And to say, and to give you that sort of context, I mean, just think about that for a second. We're barely, I mean, we're fighting for our humanity, truly. I mean,
okay, well, here's an example from my own real life experience. I'm 44. I'm a little older than my esteemed colleagues here on the panel. And I remember when my mom wanted to have a tubal ligation. This was in the late 1970s. She could not have that surgery without my father's signature and permission.
Same.
And my father refused to give it to her for like 2 years. He would not sign because he wanted more children and my mother didn't. But a woman could not have surgery without her husband's permission. When my parents split up, my mother was nearly rendered homeless because landlords could legitimately refuse to rent an apartment to a divorced woman because she shouldn't have left her marriage in the first place. So this kind of sexism has been I've seen a huge progression just in my short lifetime.
I mean, that exact example, I looked into tubal ligation for myself, and I was turned down by 4 doctors. 4.
Wow.
Even though I have a medical condition that it actually causes issues with the reproductive system, and even though I had those issues, even though those issues may have caused me to be in pain or to be sterile or a number of other things, they said no because I hadn't had babies yet, and it was just it's maddening as a woman to be consistently told over and over again in these little ways every day that you're not allowed to make your own decisions.
Yeah.
Your opinion doesn't matter, even if you sign a waiver. I offered because they were worried about people changing their minds. Well, 26% of women change their minds. Well, that means 74% of women
don't.
don't.
I was married when I was having that conversation with myself and my now ex-husband, who's a very dear friend, we decided not to have children because I also have reproductive issues that would make it very dangerous for me to be pregnant. And again, 4 doctors it took before I was granted my surgery.
My doctor has been stalling me from getting a breast reduction for like 4 years. Like just
That's
a breast reduction. He's like, you should really wait, and like won't give me my recommendations and like all this stuff. Like I'm going to other avenues now, but I'm like, why are you trying to control that?
So ultimately,
Like, seriously?
that assault on women's actual, even physical sovereignty is ingrained systemically in our society.
That's how it ties in. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You talk. I'm here to listen. I just hit record.
I think, maybe we can talk about some of our first experiences, or the variety of experiences. This is another thing that I have a close personal male friend who, I remember we were talking about online dating. Maybe this is a little bit more into this for one of the other episodes in the series, but he couldn't believe that none of these women will respond, and he's so nice, and he took all this time to write something direct to this, and no one's responding, and he's like, and he's complaining to me, and I explained to him that as a woman, it's being on the other end of things, it's really difficult, and you get all sorts of gross pictures, you get all sorts of gross things said to you, it's super inappropriate, so it's hard to sift through literally hundreds of messages saying all sorts of things that you really don't have any interest in seeing or hearing, and he didn't believe me. So he created a profile, asked a female friend to use a couple of her photos, and experienced it for one day. He said after one day he had to delete the account because he was so deeply disgusted with what other men were doing.
It's overwhelming and horrible.
And it just illustrated to me that truly men just don't know. They don't know the severity. They don't know the depth to which we really experience this on a day-to-day basis. It's not just like, you know, the hot construction workers on the street whistling it as you go by. Like that's one of many, many things.
Yeah, and they think it's just that one thing, but it's like we just had that 5 seconds ago from someone else, and then 10 seconds before that.
Well, you mentioned, Alexis, that you were at the club last night, and I was sitting there thinking about the amount of amazing behavior from gentlemen trying to dance with women.
Oh my God, I watched this guy get kicked out last night, and he like went from woman to woman to woman to woman all night long. I was sober working at an event, and so I just watched everything unfold. It was amazing.
Yeah, I have to wonder. It's kind of bewildering that we as a society have gotten to a place where it is an acceptable hello to send a picture of your penis.
Unsolicited dick pics.
You know,
my favorite.
like when that's never worked for anybody. Or, you know, in a club, when did it become appropriate to anonymously grind your crotch against a stranger's leg? You know, that we don't let dogs do that.
Mm-hmm.
Or like try to kiss you in front of your friends, like as a group, like you don't even know this person. Like, why are you?
Even things like touching someone on the bus, or and sometimes it's by accident. Like honestly, sometimes these things happen, and what you need to say is, "Oh, so very sorry," and that's all.
Yeah,
that's all you need to do. I didn't intend that. That's all you need to do. But I think maybe I'll speak to some of the things that have happened to me in broad terms. And because I think that this will be valuable to some listeners who don't realize that those things are things that happen to women. So maybe we'll pool all of our experiences. So aside from actual like rape, that's a big obvious one, I suppose. But catcalling, I've had people following me. I've had a man walk alongside me, just creating conversation, but walked alongside me for several blocks, thinking that was okay. I've gone on a date with somebody who tried to kiss me as soon as he got there, and then when I ended the date and went to leave, and I said, and he was really giving me the creeps, so I said, no, I'm not interested, and he's like, oh, no doesn't really mean no, and I freezed. I totally froze, and I was just so shocked that someone would actually say that to my face. And I said, no means no. Are you fucking serious? I don't know if we can swear on this, but
there's a button I can say explicit content.
And I yelled.
Why are we worried about if someone is going to be worried about the F word and every other thing that is being said here,
Okay,
like,
true
grow
that.
up.
Seriously, right?
Yeah, that's fair. And I said, seriously, and I walked the other direction, and I was shaking because I had to look back to see if he was following me.
Yeah.
You
People,
always have to look back.
people waiting for you outside your place of work, regulars. If you work in the service industry, you have to tread that fine line between good customer service, flirtation, and professionalism because it's expected in some way. I've had people ask me when I worked at a door if I was tight. Just
Wow.
walked in, paid their cover, and asked if I was tight. I've had, I don't know, endless "Hey baby girls, could you just go do this for me?" expectation of service in various ways. Let's keep adding on to this.
Okay. Wow. Well, aside from, I'm not actually bothered by catcalling. I just, I'll either say, yeah, have a nice day and walk on. I've never had any really truly vulgar experiences. I mean, I've heard some vulgar things, but at the same time, like I said, I just walk on.
Brush them off, right?
But I know for a lot of women, catcalling is really uncomfortable. So there's catcalling. I had a guy in Thailand follow me through a series of laneways. I didn't realize he was following me at first, except that I kept changing my route and he kept following me. And I turned around and I looked him right in the eye. I said, "What do you want?" And he went away. But I had to turn around and be quite aggressive with him. There's, I've had, I won't get into the horrifying details, but sexual assault from men has started for me about the age of 13 when an adult cornered me behind the bleachers at my school.
Oh yeah, being cornered. I've been trapped in a room before.
Yeah. When I was 14, a boy tried to trap me in his house. He wouldn't let me out. I have been violently sexually assaulted. I have had a family member attempt, not successfully. I have, there's varying levels of just total sexual misconduct. Not all of it was extremely violent, but it was still wrong. And very much an assault. You don't have the right to touch me intimately without my absolute permission. Ever. And that's no longer a rule that anybody respects. One of the things I find quite interesting just about dialogue between men and women. My mother was a sexual health educator for a long period of time.
You're lucky to have
And
me
a
here.
sexual health counselor. So there was no shaming or sex weirdness in my family at all, which is remarkable because I come from an Irish Italian Catholic family. But at the same time, because that happened in my household, conversations about sexual health were as common as past assault. So when I got into my early adulthood and started interacting with, my peers, I could speak about sex and sexual health in, a very matter-of-fact way. And I was getting all this unwanted male attention. And I did not understand what was going on until a friend of mine sat me down and said, "Jen, if you're talking about blowjobs or sex or in front of a lot of us, we think you're hinting that you might want to do that with us." I'm thinking, what? Really? We're all
We can't just
adults
have a
here. We've been
conversation.
learning about reproductive health since we were 12. Why are we not grown up enough to have just a conversation about sex without it being taken as an offer? It's a subject that affects all of us, and yet a certain segment of the population, both men and women, simply can't talk about reproductive health without making it somehow a sexual interaction when it's not.
Make it tense for
Yeah.
one reason or another.
Yeah. Definitely.
Ooh,
My next.
ooh, you're
You want me
next.
to talk about I think I've worked in the industry for so long. I started as a hostess at 12 or 13, and I've worked in clubs and bars and stuff. So I think I'm very, very. I don't notice it. It goes over my head so much that I can't even think of those tiny little instances. It's just the big ones that really stick out to me. And I don't even get me started about Thailand because I almost died numerous times. I had a guy chase me down an alley and got help from these random other kids that helped hide me in an alley.
I've had
And
travel experiences with other
I've
women
had a
too.
lot of bad ones over traveling and stuff. Traveling alone, which I asked for it apparently, but it happens. And I even had a woman come up to me telling me I wasn't safe, and she went out of her way for 2 hours to make sure I got somewhere safely. So there's amazing people out there. I think also the thing that bothers me a lot here, that I hear so many stories from my girlfriends and things that have happened to me so many times, is on the bus at night. Even if you're not wearing provocative clothing, but like I've been wearing like giant baggy sweaters, and I will have a guy come and like put his hands on my seat and try and talk to me and won't leave me alone. We'll get off the bus, even if I'm far away from a stop, I'll get off and try to get away from them. They'll follow, and I just read a story about a girlfriend that I used to work with that same thing happens to her. I don't know if maybe it's the same guy who just does this to women in Vancouver, but same thing happened to her, and she asked for someone to walk with her, and he ended up leaving her alone. But it happens so often, getting followed and talked to and touched, and it's just
the personal space thing. I was thinking this morning in advance of this about the little things that we don't really notice that point to the bigger issue here. One of which was the safe walks at night. Why is there a need for that?
Yeah.
Why do we all know what a rape whistle is?
Why do we feel the need to have a knife on us at all times?
That there are things that we just accept as, oh, well, that would be a useful thing. Like there was a really innovative designer that designed a pair of rape-proof underwear.
Yeah.
That exists. Also, people buy them.
Yeah. There's a market for that. There's a need for that.
Mm-hmm.
That is a problem. Like,
yeah,
wow.
It's enough of a problem that people can truly capitalize on it.
Yeah.
Which is a little...
Yeah, the demand is so high.
Yeah.
If I don't have a knife on me or something and I feel uncomfortable, like someone's following me, and if I have a lighter, that's kind of my backup, is like I sit there and I just flick it constantly so it's really hot, and if someone comes at me, my idea is I'm just going to like stick it in their face or something. Like, you have all these plans constantly because you just have to.
And again, it comes down to the fundamental problem that we've reached a point where women have pretty much exhausted the number of preventative measures that we can put into day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And
it's exhausting.
And it is exhausting, and it comes down to the statement is not women need to avoid rape, it's that men need to stop raping.
Yeah.
Again, passive voice, active voice. Men need to stop tolerating sexual assault. They need to stop teaching sexual assault. They need to, call out other men for behaving badly. In the Gentleman's Cultural Guide to Rape, that post that's going around, the guy said that he found himself feeling very, very indignant that he would have to take measures for his own safety walking down the street. And then he realized his own privilege in that remark, his own entitlement and primacy around safety. For him, that's normal. I don't have to fear anything when I go walking outside. Why would I have to? That's what women live every single day. Mm-hmm. And it's not a constant state of perilous threat. It's a constant state of being hypervigilant.
Yeah.
So that even the smallest threat is dealt with before it becomes a problem.
Sure.
Even though its very existence is actually the problem.
And I think that it's important to consider it from the other side of that, and the more, I guess, positive language of consent. This is something that I participated in Burning Man for the first time this year, and prior to the Burning Man proper, there was a local event called Burn in the Forest. And one of the things that I found so refreshing about being in that environment was this global understanding of consent and how it worked, and everybody knew the script, as it were.
Yep,
Can
totally.
I touch your shoulder? Do you mind if I give you a hug? Any kind of touch whatsoever, not even sexual.
Part of the culture, or whatever.
The burning culture is really good
as
for that.
As part of the culture, and I thought, oh God, this is so nice, because there are lots of spaces that are clothing optional and even like cozy spaces if you want, and sex positive spaces
and cuddle puddles
and all of these things. But these things couldn't exist without the culture of consent, and it seems so obvious. Like, you should ask another person if you're going to touch their child or their dog or their belongings. So why wouldn't you ask them to touch their shoulder or their hair or their butt or
any part of their body?
Any part of them. And I think that enthusiastic consent is something that needs to be widely adopted and discussed, because unique to any other environment, I felt so safe there. I just thought, you don't really realize what the weight of that hypervigilance really is until you're in an environment where you don't need to be. Totally. And those environments are so so few.
Yeah.
And as men, I think that's the one thing that I'd say. I hope that men learn the language of and start using and applying it every day in every relationship they have. Enthusiastic consent. Ask to touch.
Mm-hmm.
Just ask. That's all you have to do. And don't be upset if someone says no, because they have every right to say no.
Yep.
They have every right to say yes. They have every right to say no, and you're not part of that equation.
And your feelings about being rejected are not her problem.
Right.
Not even a little bit. Just move on and go deal with yourself.
Because if we could recreate that environment, I would feel much safer, and frankly, I would respond to a lot more
Mm-hmm.
people who were interested in a bar situation. If I knew that every person who is going to touch me or going to ask for a favor or whatever would ask. Right. Just ask. That's all you need to do. And that includes relationships. That's one of the stories that I felt is worth sharing is I think a lot of women have been in this circumstance and it feels icky, but you just don't know what to call it. Where I had one of my first long-term relationships. I remember we were living together, and the topic of sex got frustrating because I was working like 3 jobs and I was just exhausted. And he's like, "Well, you don't want to anymore," and feeling like you owe your partner sex.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
That's so normal for a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Is like you're counting the days, like so that he'll get mad at you or he'll blame you for his I have blue balls, babe. Like
Just
that's,
do it to make him happy and
shut
him off.
That's
totally.
part of the equation here.
Definitely.
It's not just people attacking people on the street. It's your boyfriend or girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the
Sure.
people you know at the party.
Yeah. And I've actually heard men say similar things, that they've been made to feel somehow abnormal because they have, high libidos or a great lust for their partner. And it may be that those people are sexually mismatched. But ultimately, you don't owe even your partner sex. And I'm going to bring this back to a broader legal context for a second. It was only, I think, in the late, say, mid-'80s to mid-'90s, I can't remember exactly when it was, that spousal rape actually became a crime.
Mm-hmm.
There is sorry to interrupt,
Yeah,
but this is important to know this because there is a story of a man in Ottawa that did not realize that he thought he was married and he thought that he could have sex with his wife all the time.
And when was this?
Friday.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still going on.
They really do think that. Yeah. And that's a problem.
Right. And it used to be that a husband could refuse to grant his wife a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
So she would have to stay married to this person.
Mm-hmm. And endure it.
And if she left, again, she probably couldn't get an apartment. Or certainly in the 70s or 80s, early 80s, women couldn't get bank accounts without their husband's signatures.
Mm-hmm.
There was
so crazy.
a landmark case actually in Alberta, I believe it was in 1983, where a woman came into the marriage with significant assets. And when the marriage split up, the husband was going to take all of the assets. And she fought for her right to keep her assets and to be compensated for the work that she did in terms of, on their farm and improving their farm, et cetera, et cetera. That was a landmark case in Canada in the early 80s.
Yeah, far away.
It's not that far away.
This was Friday.
And this was Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fact that there are men in the world who do believe that the marriage certificate gives them the right to sex whenever they want is obviously fundamentally flawed.
Well, it goes deeper too because it's not even. It's almost like the men are entitled to sex. Period.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the woman is a chattel like the couch.
Yeah. My name is Kevin. Hi, nice to meet you. We should now be having sex.
Right.
Yeah.
Whenever I want.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whenever it's convenient for me.
Yeah.
And I think I've made the decision to concede, and I want to have sex tonight. Well, I don't. Well, it doesn't. But babe, men don't think that. Good, decent men think that doesn't really happen. But you gotta get a rocks off, man. That really does happen in many relationships, and yes, that is problematic. If you're wondering.
When I was much younger, when I was around in my early 20s, one of the issues that was going around was, whether or not you could wake your partner up with sex, in the middle of the night. If you were feeling like you wanted some, you could just go ahead and have sex with your partner. Nobody considered that the woman who is sleeping cannot actually consent to sex.
Right, because you were asleep.
Yeah,
Because you're asleep. You're not conscious. I can't imagine that having sex with an unconscious person or a sleeping person is really all that hot, but it's the fundamental entitlement to another person's body. That's wrong.
You got that. That's good.
There's just a lot of nodding. And I think
Yeah.
this podcast might sound kind of all over the place, and I think that's also illustrative. It's like women.
Just so much.
It infiltrates everything in our lives, and it's hard to really stay on topic because it's like, oh, I want to bring up this, oh, I want to bring up that, oh, I didn't really quite say that all of what I wanted to say about this topic. It's just this. If you speak to any woman in your life and ask earnestly and just listen, they will have many, many stories. And if they don't, they're lying to themselves, frankly.
Yeah.
They've blocked it out, or it's so pervasive that they've minimized that experience, so they personally don't think it's worth mentioning.
Or
Because
for
it's so
whatever
pervasive.
reason, it's just well without outside of their comfort zone
Right.
to even say
Yeah.
anything at all.
That's
Yeah,
true.
that happens too.
You know?
Well, let's drive a couple of things. And I when I did plan this, I expected this because this is the first time we've talked about it.
Right.
Like, in terms of, I don't know anyone else is. I'm not bragging. This is not bragging, but I don't know anyone else that's doing this. So I think we're opening a can of worms that has to be opened.
Mm-hmm.
So I think,
we're peering into the can of worms that's always been open.
well, or that.
Starting to pull them out of
Right,
them.
yeah.
It's like, oh, look, they're squirming around in
Yeah,
there.
or we're pouring it, whatever illustration you want to use.
It's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Whatever illustration you want to use, it is what it is. But there's a couple of areas I do want to. I think we need to go further into the idea of what we talked about, more about the relationship within, like, oh, I'm in a relationship, so you and I are in a relationship, so there's possibly nothing that I could do that could be completely offensive.
Right. The
Right.
idea that if you're my partner, then therefore you can't assault me.
Yeah.
Right. That. Go ahead,
Okay. I'm sure most, you might not have, but everybody in the room has seen the tea thing about consent.
Yes.
Mhm.
Have you seen
I
it?
don't think I have.
Okay. It's a little video
Look it up on video on
that
YouTube.
that
Okay.
compares consent to offering somebody a cup of tea.
Okay.
And one of the things that they say is that just because that person wanted tea the last time they were there doesn't mean that they want tea this time.
That makes sense.
And you wouldn't force somebody to drink a cup of tea when they don't want to. You wouldn't pour tea down an unconscious person's throat. And it's such a simple metaphor, but it's so absolutely effective. And
Just because you liked tea with milk and sugar last time doesn't mean that you want it this time that way.
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
There you go. Take that how you want it.
And I mean, let's be frank. That can be in a relationship, in an intimacy context. That comes down to, like, perhaps the kind of sex. Oh, well, you liked anal sex last week. Why don't you want it today?
Or we did it yesterday. Why don't you want it now?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So it fundamentally ignores the other person in the relationship, and it comes back to what I was saying much earlier in the podcast about even exchanges happening solely on men's terms. That didn't happen the way I expected it to. Right, because you didn't consider that the other person is autonomous and might have a different set of responses than what you rehearsed in your head.
Yeah.
So it's
And often it's not intentionally that way.
no, there's no
No.
malice in it.
And it's just that that's how it's been set up. So if you feel like if you're feeling defensive listening to this, I would ask you to ask yourself why.
Yeah.
Because the consent thing is the other part I wanted to make sure that we hit on was if I'm being served tea and I agreed to it, I can stop drinking that tea at any time.
And put the cup down.
Put the cup down. Maybe I am not feeling well all of a sudden, and I would like to put it down. That's the other part that I found a real struggle for me personally was, I know it sounds crazy to say this out loud, but to say yes to a sex act and then feel comfortable enough to say like, no thanks, I don't want to do this anymore, or this is not the type of thing that I want. I want this rather than that.
It turns out I actually don't like this. So
Yeah.
can we respect the fact that I want to stop?
Yeah, exactly. Just like the fear of
Yeah.
what will happen if I change my mind.
Yeah.
Right.
And that was another thing that took me a while to grasp. Like, if I said yes, then it means I'm committing to it, and whatever happens, I guess. And that's not quite right either.
Right, and to bring it back to the tea metaphor for a second, you wouldn't force somebody who has put their tea down to finish that cup of tea for your own satisfaction. So why would you force somebody to continue a sexual act for your satisfaction that they're not interested in continuing? Like, how is that in any way hot or satisfying?
For sure.
There's something fundamentally wrong with somebody who really enjoys something with somebody that isn't actually enjoying it.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be a mutual exchange.
Like, if you're dating each other, of course, hopefully you want to have sex. Like,
Sure.
you know, hopefully you're sexually attracted to each other, and that's that. And if you're not, well, then, like you said, you're probably not sexually compatible, and you should figure that out. But it doesn't mean that you're going to want to do it all the time in the same way. Like, just respect it.
And just to have the conversation about it. And it seems so
Yeah,
obvious
be
to
open.
say that, but I think as a woman, you don't quite grasp even how you've internalized it for yourself. At least I'm speaking from my own experience. I didn't really realize how much I internalized the I owe something. And it's still something, frankly, although clearly I'm on this podcast, so I'm very open about the topic, and I discuss these things with my partner all the time. There's still those moments where I catch myself like, oh, well, it's been X number of days.
Oh, totally. I
And,
feel that all the time.
and you're like, oh, you're having that conversation with yourself of,
Yeah.
oh, nothing is owed. I can say no, or I'm going through, for me personally, I've grieved the loss of a family member recently, and that made things
You a little
difficult.
bit,
And for a hot second, I felt guilty that I wasn't being affectionate enough with my partner. But that is my choice, and it always should be the choice, a discussion and a choice.
Right.
Enthusiastic consent.
And I mean, as somebody with a particularly high libido, I have had partners who had lower libidos than mine, and I will absolutely admit that I have, at times, felt a little indignant and taken it personally when my partner didn't want to engage in sex with me. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that, I was just sexually mismatched with those people. But there's also a thing in society whereby women who are, confidently sexual or have high libidos are often shamed for it.
Absolutely.
Slut shaming.
Say,
Yeah.
damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Exactly.
If you don't, you're a prude.
If you do, you're a slut.
Yeah.
That was covered in the Breakfast Club in the early 80s.
Like, aren't we past this, guys?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Yeah. We should probably need to get on that one too. Slut shaming. Actually,
Oh, that's the whole podcast
that would
series
be
on
a
its
whole
own.
other thing.
Part of
definitely.
it. Okay, fine.
That could go on forever about
that could go on. The one thing I do want to talk about as well is, and I remember this, the first guest that I heard here at the school, we're recording right now in Van Arts, hi Smitty, was Jody Vance. And you may know who Jody Vance is. She was a longtime anchor at TSN. She's now at Roundhouse Radio. She's been at CKNW. I find her to be a fine human being. But the thing that she said that really struck me is, and she talked to the women in the room, and she said, the moment for you having photos of you drinking, we're getting into this industry, is over.
Yeah.
And it was interesting that she said that to the women, not the men, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
And it really prevailed to me as well, because one of the words that has been ringing in my head is, with this Harvey Weinstein conversation, is, well, that's just Harvey. And how many times have I heard or said, well, that's just...
The boys will be boys thing.
And boys will be boys. And
Exactly.
he doesn't mean anything.
No, he's harmless. I've heard that so many times. Oh, he's like that, but he's harmless.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Or
That's helpful.
even, I saw this in school as well. There was one particular guy that would always be touching the girls and rubbing their shoulders. And I'm like, that's not right. Is this right? No, this isn't right. I can't,
If it doesn't seem right, it isn't.
It isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So the point of being, and it gets into the workplace because there's a whole other podcast that we can do about why women are not being the same paid as men. That's another podcast in and of itself that we can do, and specifically in this industry, and the lack of female voices in this industry right now. But the whole idea around the workplace of some of the innuendo, shaming, slut shaming, we can use that word, and entitlement that has gone around. Can we talk about that? And
sure, like our experiences of harassment in the workplace?
Yeah, or can we unpack that in some way, shape, or form? I don't know if I have a particular question, but I feel like it's something in this can that we're staring at. One of the worms is this one.
Yeah, I think, man, that's challenging because there's the position of being in the shoes of someone who relies on that job or that contract or that relationship with that coworker to pay their bills and to feed their kids and to make sure that they survive. I mean, it is a powerful position to be in when you're the, I don't know, I'm explaining basically sexual harassment in the workplace is bad, and of course it is, but I mean the reason that women often don't speak up is multifactorial, but in the workplace it's extra difficult to navigate because it could mean that you lose a job, and while that's on one hand it's like, well, you don't want a job that treats you like that anyway. That's a really privileged thing to say because you don't know how hard it is to find a job for that particular person, or if that's exactly the flexibility they need, or maybe it's their dream job and they just have a really terrible manager. There's so many factors. I mean, there are so many factors at play there. There's so much of a power play that I think that addressing this stuff in the workplace is very dangerous for women economically. And I guess that's all I have to say about that particular thing at the moment. But that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I'll speak to that briefly from my own experience. I'm a paralegal. I work in the legal industry, which of course contains a lot of high-powered A-type personalities, both men and women. And certainly in my 20-some-odd years in the industry, I have encountered a lot of very entitled, powerful men who have behaved badly. The one experience that comes to mind specifically, and again, because I'm ferocious and outspoken, I haven't really been treated all that badly, because I'll bark and I will do something about it. But I was working in a law firm that was shared. It was a space that was shared with 3 sole practitioners, and I worked for one of them, and the other one, nice guy, for sure, but had a reputation for being a little over-friendly with the female staff. And I remember standing by the door, and I was about to leave, and he was standing there, and he was just kind of regarding me for just a little too long. And I looked at him, and I said, can I help you? And he says, no, I'm just looking. And I looked at him, and I said, at what? And he just backed right off. And the next day I went into my boss's office, and I said, I need to talk to you. And I told him what had happened, and fortunately, and it's odd that I have to say fortunately, but my boss said to me, do you want me to do anything about it right now? And I said, no, but if it happens again, I expect you to have my back. Mm-hmm. And it was a conscious choice for me to say, no, I don't want you to do anything about it, because I dealt with it. Mm-hmm. He was looking at me in the wrong way, and there was an exchange. I was like, no, and he desisted. But had he done it again, I would have marched him right into that office and called him to the floor in front of my boss. Mm-hmm. Not every woman in the world feels empowered enough to do that.
Yeah.
In any workplace. Yeah. I think a lot of women don't.
Yeah. You're tossing in your head, do I say something and possibly screw up my relationships with HR, the person who did it, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, there's the whole social and economic fallout of that. Or do I suck it up this one time? But the thing is, how many times do you just, quote-unquote, suck it up?
Well, and the Harvey Weinstein thing is what fueled a lot of this, right? And if you think about it in that sense, the reason that it did was because in Hollywood, all those people that it's happened to were terrified of not making it.
Yeah.
They didn't want to speak out about it because they didn't want to lose their chance of being a star, getting work. Like, they thought that they would never get work again if they spoke out about it. It's very similar. Like, that's what fueled all of this, and it happens to everyone every day in their different jobs as well. You know?
Right, and
it's not that industry. It's all
Yeah,
industry.
It's all
literally
industries, yeah.
Like, literally every single one. Like,
Yeah.
any job I've ever had, I could probably give you a little example of it, you
Oh,
know?
yeah.
From a Starbucks barista to I've also worked in law firms, and my God.
Yeah.
And nightclubs and, you know, everything.
Well,
Everything.
Likewise, I've
Yeah.
I've worked everywhere from solopreneur with an assistant kind of thing or with my own company to multinationals.
Yeah.
And nonprofits. Every type
Everywhere.
of business, every type of organization, mom and pop shop, corporate job alike.
Right. And what I find interesting about some of the response I see to the Harvey Weinstein scandal is how many women are coming out and saying, well, she chose to do that as part of her career advancement. She prostituted herself for her Hollywood Walk of Fame star. It's like, seriously? Sex should always be a choice, not a resume requirement.
And
It's,
also, can we
that's not
support
rocket
each other?
science,
Yeah.
right?
Come on.
It again to me further illustrates the problem of it. Women, this is so much part of the system that women are accepting this current state as just normal.
Yeah.
And to any woman who is, you know, to say that she's not a feminist, like, doesn't make any sense to me. Like,
Yeah.
oh, so you don't consider yourself a person?
Yeah. Exactly.
I don't.
Are you
I
a
don't
coach?
understand.
I get so frustrated when I see women say, I don't need feminism. It's like, okay, you have enough privilege that you think you don't need feminism. You do. You just don't realize it. But for the love of God, use your feminism to help a disenfranchised woman. Don't just go, I don't need that. I'm not participating. Not good enough. Not good enough.
For the love of the world, we all need feminism.
Mhm.
Every
Yeah.
single one. Like, every
And
single one of us.
I'm glad that we're going down this track because men need it too.
Exactly.
And the reason
yeah.
that men need it too is because you are held to standards that don't make sense too.
Yeah.
You're held to a standard of what is it to be a man, and if you're a strong man, then you don't have these bad experiences. You've never been raped. You've never have had a bad experience sexually. You've suck it up, princess. What are all the other crappy things that men are told? Your emotions don't matter, or that you can't be emotional about things, or all of those things come from.
Or emotion is presumed a sexual preference.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right? I've had a couple of men say to me privately or tell me their own stories of having women come up and just, grab their genitals and there is an echoed feeling of shame and humiliation, and I don't know what to do, especially for men too, because if they retaliate in any way, wow, that's a whole other big can of vicious Dune style sandworms.
Yeah.
It's
yeah, men don't feel like they can come out and be upset about that.
No.
A quick grab to their crotch. They think that, like, if they told another guy that, he'd probably be like, dude, that's sick.
Yeah.
Yeah,
High
but
five.
You should be happy about it.
Yeah.
The assumption that all men are walking around wanting random women to fondle their genitals is equally as ridiculous.
Yeah, it's not true.
It's
there
just
are
not true.
men out there who do not want this too.
Lots, actually.
Yeah.
They're just like,
Well-
why are you touching
Yeah,
me?
speak out, please.
Well, it's even, and I'm not gay, but one of the things that I'm learning is if you're a gay man, to illustrate this male feminism thing, and even read some of Mike Morrison's stuff, just, I don't always read it, but when I read it, it's some of the things that gay men go through we don't talk about enough.
Nope.
Sure.
Because the whole,
But they still have the benefit of being men, so therefore are much safer in those. So
They are,
yeah, sure, but I agree with you, but there's also you're an actor. Obviously, you're pussy and sissy and, yeah.
all of these negative ideas about what you should or should not be.
Right.
Yeah.
There's an emasculation about male creativity that is
Yeah.
just a bit silly.
Yeah.
I also know of one man who is gay and was sexually assaulted by a woman who was trying to fix him. And as a result of this, which he could obviously considered rape, he was drunk. She took gross advantage, didn't get consent, and she became pregnant.
Oh my god.
Oh my god.
And then she
Horror
came
story.
after him for child support.
Oh, the worst.
And she was granted child support, despite the fact that he said that she had sexually assaulted him. He wasn't believed, and he
And it's wrong on so many.
and now he's from what I understand, it's not somebody I know. It's a friend of a friend, but I've actually spoken with him online, and I did speak with him privately. We're just not friends. He has left the United States and come to Canada because of this. I mean, if he goes back to the States, he'll probably be, nabbed and slapped with a huge back child support issue. But this is a man who is being forced to support a child that is a product of rape.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's one extreme example, but
That
it's
is,
a gay
okay.
man, straight
Yeah.
woman tried to fix him. There are consequences to him too.
So the parts where it's difficult to come forward and the court's believing him and all of those things are directly related to feminism.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because if we are truly treating people equally, there will be no sides. It will just be evidence.
Precisely.
And it doesn't work that way. Therefore, we know that it's a systemic issue.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
affects everybody.
And we never got into the religious aspect of this, which is a huge part of this, with the Catholic Church, with, we can go on and on.
Again,
It's
that would
further
probably be
exercising
another
power.
entire
Yeah.
thing.
I mean, it's strange we hear a lot from Franklin Graham, John Piper, and all of these guys about homosexuality. I haven't heard a peep of them from them about Me Too. Nothing.
Nothing.
That's actually the thing that I think we started out this thing with what was your first reaction to
Yeah.
Me Too, is honestly the deafening silence from men.
Yeah.
Just silence. And not, I hear you, I'm listening, but just, I don't have to respond because this doesn't really affect me. That is the pinnacle of male privilege. And if you're unaware, or if it doesn't change or affect your life in any direct way to respond to this, then you are benefiting from privilege.
Absolutely.
Well, this is a good way to end this off. So I'm going to leave this ask you guys with two thoughts. So the first one is, the question is to the audience in general, what would you want to leave them with your final thought on? And the second part of this is part 2, 3, I don't know anymore. But when we talk to the men, what would be one question that you would want us to cover in the conversation?
Okay.
Biggest thing for me is, like, if you are a man listening to this, and, like, the first step is just to, if you think it's wrong, just say it. Stop doing the whole, that's awesome and cool. That would be a really easy starting point. Simple.
As difficult as it may be, it's more difficult being the person on the other side of it.
Yeah.
Like, if you think it's difficult to say, hey man, it's not cool that you catcalled that girl, think about all the experience that girl has had that led up to that, and it'll be a little easier.
Okay, so I guess my closing thoughts would be, first of all, the evil that you pass by is the evil you tolerate. That's where you set your standard. What you pass by is what you would tolerate or agree with, and there's a whole lot of that. But fundamentally, the question I'd like to have answered from men, it's kind of a two-part question, is A, what are you actively doing within your own gender group to combat this? And B, if the answer is nothing, why do you feel that there's nothing for you to do?
That's a good
Perfect.
question.
Yeah.
I think if I were to ask the male population to do something, is to just listen. Talk to the women in your life and don't interrupt them, don't talk over them, don't say me too, don't, just for the first little while, just listen. Because you'd be surprised how many women, and I will bet that every single woman you know has had some sort of experience, and this is actually my partner's idea, because he did this when dating, and decided, you know what, I don't think I understand this, and asked every woman in his life, have you had an experience of harassment or assault? Yeah. And he was horrified by what he heard, but if it helps you to contextualize what we're talking about today, I would just ask that just listen to the women around you and ask yourself, if you don't believe them or if you think it's not important, ask yourself why.
And if it makes you uncomfortable, start with someone that you feel comfortable with. And like once you really start talking about it and hearing it and realizing what's happening, I think it makes it a lot easier to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, we will thank you guys for coming on,
Pleasure.
Of course.
and I hope this was a very informative
I
conversation.
hope this made sense.
Yeah. Listen to it later.
Listen to it later. Well, you know what? I think maybe if it does or it doesn't, one of my goals is you can look back on this in some ways in a year and go, I'm like, wow, we either have made progress from this, or why the hell are we still in this same position?
Totally.
Or someone else is saying, okay, we can take from this and move this way. So I appreciate you.
So it's a step.
It's a step.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, we are going to do a series with men, and I'm going to close this off with one of the guests that are going to be part of it. His name is Curtis Heron, CEO Pilot. That's how he posted a Facebook Live, and I'm going to close it with what he's had to say, and that will lead us into our next conversation when we talk about men. However, we are going to interview Casey Logan about online dating, which I think is a huge part of this. So I'm going to call that the men part 2 and online dating 1.5, I think would be the best way. So we will talk to you all soon. You know where to follow me, KVOLE, subscribe to the podcast, subscribe on YouTube, SoundCloud, etc. Thanks for listening.
Hey everybody, it's Curtis here. It's been
Not yet.
5 days, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 5 days since the maelstrom of the Me Too thing went viral on social media. And I just want to talk to you about the absolute imperative nature it is that we keep that conversation going. Don't let it become a trend that just sort of whiffles in the wind. This is a really important topic because I don't know. I have a lot of friends who are women, and I have to say that I am appalled and amazed both at some of the stories that some of them have shared with me, and I really want all of us men to stand up, look at ourselves with absolute full integrity, full honesty, and really be truly authentic as to whether or not we are really living an unconditional man, or living as an unconditional man. It is unbelievable to me. Even small things have huge impacts on women in our lives, and it actually resonates through a lot of their lives. And as a man myself, there are things that I've experienced that men have done, and I. As a result of some of the stories, I've started to think differently about my own experiences as well, and not to the same extent, but I think I can relate a little bit, and this changed the way I'm putting things. So let's keep this conversation going. Let's keep being better as men. Let's keep working hard to understand how important we are in this world, and more importantly, as men, let's live up to some of the standards that women in our lives are actually setting for us. They're setting the stage. Women empowerment has been going for some odd 40 years now. I'm in awe of the supportive nature that the groups, the community they've built for themselves. And we don't have that as men, not nearly to the same extent that we really could have. I know a lot of men are lone wolves, but hey, we're humans. We have emotions just the same as men, or as women do. And I think just talking to a few men and whatnot, I think to a large degree we've been taught to avoid our emotions. Unless anger, we're allowed to have anger. Curse and swear as much as we want, and throw things around, and get angry. We're allowed to do that. But it's just a touch of emotion. But let's talk about some other emotions as well. And let's not be afraid of those ourselves. Lean into whatever emotions we have. Share them and learn and listen to the women in their lives. I mean, truly listen, not with your ears, your entire body, your entire presence. Don't get defensive. Just simply experience what they've experienced. Maybe we can become better ourselves. So let's work really hard to become less conditional and become more unconditional.